One night, my mother screamed at my father to leave, and from that moment, everything fell apart. I remember that night as if it never ended. Our old house on the Vermont hillside was usually quiet, the kind of silence that felt safe. But that night, it echoed like a theater of tragedy. There were shouts, the crash of glass, the dragging thud of a suitcase across the wooden floor. My mother, Brenda Quinn, was screaming in the middle of the hall. "You're a failure, Michael. You were never meant to run Aurora." I stood on the staircase, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. Under the dim yellow light, my father, Michael Quinn, looked 10 years older than he had that morning. He wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, holding a heavy leather briefcase. From inside it, I could see the corner of a blueprint sticking out. He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the faintest smile. Sad, resigned. "I'm sorry, Alara," he said softly. "You'll understand one day. Just not tonight." He knelt down, hugged me tightly. I remember the smell of coffee and cedar wood, the smell that always meant home. When the door slammed shut behind him, my mother's voice rang out again, shrill and final. "Don't come back. Aurora is mine." That last word, mine, echoed against the stone walls like a verdict, and in that echo, something inside me cracked. After he left, the house went quiet, so quiet that I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock. My little sister, Mila, only 8 at the time, peeked out from her room, clutching her teddy bear. "Alara, is Daddy going on a trip?" she whispered. I knelt down, pulled her close, and lied. Yes, just for a few weeks. But I knew he wasn't coming back. Later that night, when Mila was asleep, I heard my mother's voice again, softer now, sweet in a way that made my stomach twist. "Scott, it's done. He's gone. Everything's falling into place." I didn't know who Scott was. I only knew that hearing his name made me cold all over, like hearing the hiss of a snake behind a closed door. 2 weeks later, the official announcement came. My father, Michael Quinn, had stepped down as Chief Operating Officer of Aurora Hotels Group, the company my grandmother, Margaret Maggie Quinn, had built from scratch. The reason listed was financial misconduct and poor performance. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the silence that followed. His name was taken off the brass plaque outside the executive suite. And then Scott appeared. He was tall, sharp-dressed, his salt and pepper hair combed perfectly back. My mother introduced him one afternoon in the lobby of our main hotel. "This is Scott Hawthorne," she said with pride. "He's a global finance consultant. He's going to help expand Aurora internationally." My grandmother Maggie, nearing 70 but still sharp as ever, studied him for a long moment before shaking his hand. "Expand internationally, you say?" she replied coolly. "I've heard that phrase for 40 years. I hope this time it doesn't mean selling our soul." Scott only smiled, the kind of smile that hides more than it reveals. After that, everything changed. My mother's wardrobe filled with designer dresses. The family portraits disappeared from the walls, replaced by sleek modern art. Every time I asked about my father, she changed the subject or scoffed. Once, I tried again. "Mom, is Dad coming back?" She laughed, short, sharp, cold. "Your father ruined his own life, Alara. Don't make the same mistake. Learn to stand next to the winners." That night, I realized she didn't just want Dad gone. She wanted to erase him. And maybe erase the part of me that reminded her of him. A few days later, she called me into the living room. "Alara, you'll be moving in with your grandmother for a while," she said, flipping through papers. "Why?" I asked, panic rising. "Because Vermont is quiet and you need to focus on school. Besides, you're a distraction." I turned to Scott, standing behind her. He smiled faintly, arms crossed. "Sometimes you need to clear the path," he said, "so success can move forward." That sentence stuck in my mind like a splinter. The morning I left, Vermont was wrapped in fog. Grandma Maggie came herself to pick me up. As we drove away, I looked back at the house. My home. My mother stood on the balcony, motionless. She didn't wave. She didn't even look sad. Scott stood behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder, like he already owned everything that used to be ours. Grandma reached over and held my hand on the steering wheel. "Don't cry, Alara," she said softly. "You're not losing anything. You're just going where you belong, I asked quietly. Will Mom be okay? She sighed. Sometimes people choose the wrong allies, and you have to let them face what comes of it. I looked out the window as the fog swallowed the road, and in that moment, I knew something had changed forever. I wasn't just leaving home, I was leaving the version of myself that still believed everything could go back to the way it was. That night, I unpacked in my new room at Grandma's wooden house, the scent of pine everywhere. When I opened the desk drawer, I found an old photo. Grandma, Mom, and Dad standing in front of the very first Aurora Hotel, smiling hand in hand. I stared at it for a long time before turning it face down. I didn't want to remember their smiles. I just wanted to understand what had turned my mother into someone I barely recognized. What I didn't know was that miles away in a sleek office in Boston, my mother was signing the first set of expansion documents with Scott Hawthorne, papers that would nearly destroy everything my family had ever built. I didn't know it then, but that night, the night my father left, was only the beginning. Something in me broke that day, and that broken part, the quiet one I carried for years, would one day guide me toward the truth, because not everyone who bears the Quinn name deserves to carry its legacy. 4 years passed, enough time for Vermont's harsh winters to come and go, for the pain in my chest to stop feeling sharp and start feeling quiet. I lived with my grandmother, Margaret Maggie Quinn, in her wooden house on the edge of Lake Champlain. To the outside world, she was a legend. The woman who built Aurora Hotels Group from one roadside inn into a 14-location luxury brand across New England. To me, she was something different. A fortress, firm, fair, and frighteningly perceptive. She had rules. Breakfast at 7. No skipping family dinners. No half-hearted work. Discipline, she said, is the skeleton of every legacy. I didn't always love those words, but I grew to understand them. Under her guidance, I found peace in structure and comfort in creation. During the week, I studied architecture at Boston University. On weekends, I returned home to Vermont to help her renovate one of the old Aurora lodges, the very one where she'd first started the business in the 1980s. She taught me how to read a floor plan like a diary. Every wall has a reason, she'd say, tracing her finger over blue lines. Every room holds a story. The question is, whose? I didn't realize then that she wasn't just talking about buildings, she was talking about us. My mother called twice in 4 years, once for Christmas, once for my birthday. Both times, her voice was cheerful, distant, rehearsed, like someone practicing how to sound like a mother. Meanwhile, her name started showing up in the papers again. Aurora Hotels set to expand to Europe under new leadership. There she was, Brenda Quinn Hawthorne, Chief Marketing Officer turned visionary co-founder, and next to her, always, was Scott. Their smiles were perfect, too perfect. I still remember the first time I saw Grandma's face go pale. It was early 2023, a Sunday morning. She was in her study, reviewing quarterly reports from the corporate office in Boston. I was at the dining table, working on a hotel design project for class. "Elara," she called, her tone flat. I looked up. "Yes?" She tapped a report with her pen. "Have you seen this before?" I walked over. It was a list of new international expenses, consulting fees, marketing transfers, all signed off under Aurora Europe Expansion Project. The amounts were enormous. $20 million? I whispered. She nodded, and I never approved it. I frowned. Could Mom have done it? She doesn't have your signing authority. Grandma's eyes narrowed. Not legally, no. She closed the folder quietly. Leave it to me. That was the moment I realized something was wrong. Over the next few months, Grandma grew quieter. Her phone calls became private. Some nights I'd hear her in the study at midnight, murmuring in her old, clipped business tone, "Yes, Valerie, get me everything, every account, every signature." At first I didn't know who Valerie was. Later I learned Detective Valerie Brooks, a former FBI agent turned private investigator. She had been hired to investigate Scott Hawthorne's company, Hawthorne Global Consulting LLC. Grandma didn't tell me much, but I could sense her tension. the way she'd pause before answering questions, the way she'd study my face as if deciding whether I was ready for the truth. I didn't push her. Not yet. Spring of 2024 came with quiet thunder. I was turning 21, a senior in college, about to graduate with a degree in architecture. The morning of my birthday, Grandma asked me to come to her office. Her office was sacred ground, wood paneling, old hotel photographs, the original Aurora logo framed on the wall. The air always smelled of cedar, ink, and a faint trace of her perfume. She was sitting behind her oak desk, posture straight, expression unreadable. "Ilara," she said. "Sit down." I sat. My heart was already pounding. "I've been watching you for years," she said, voice calm. "You don't just see buildings. You understand them. You see how they breathe." I tried to smile. "You taught me that." She nodded, then slid a thick folder toward me, bound in leather, embossed with the Aurora seal. "What's this?" I asked. "Your future," she said. I opened it. Inside were property deeds, share certificates, and a set of trust documents. I froze. "Grandma, what is this?" Her gaze didn't waver. "It's Aurora," she said simply. "The company, the hotels, the legacy." I shook my head. "That's impossible. Mom, she and Scott are running everything." "They're running a project," Grandma interrupted, her voice like a blade. "A project I never authorized." My throat tightened. "Then why now?" She leaned back, eyes soft but heavy. "Because I was waiting to see if your mother would change. I hoped she would. I gave her every chance." She paused, then said quietly, "But now I have proof she forged my power of attorney to mortgage our core hotels. Scott funneled $7.5 million into offshore accounts. The FBI is watching them as we speak." I stared at her, stunned. She forged your signature?" "Yes, and she would have destroyed everything if I hadn't acted." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something that would stay with me forever. "This isn't a gift, Ilara. This is a correction. I'm transferring ownership of Aurora into a trust under your name. You'll be the sole beneficiary when you graduate. Until then, you'll shadow me, learn everything." I could barely breathe. "Why me?" I asked. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Because you see the business the way I do, with love, not greed, and because you have something your mother lost long ago, integrity." I felt tears sting my eyes. "I don't know what to say." She reached across the desk, placed her hand over mine. "Say you'll protect it. Say you'll protect us." I nodded. "I will." She exhaled softly, like she'd been holding that breath for years. Then she added one more thing, almost as an afterthought. "Call your father, Ilara. He deserves to know you finally see the truth." That night, I couldn't sleep. The folder sat on my desk, glowing under the lamplight. My grandmother's entire life, her trust in me, written in ink and signatures. I should have felt proud. I only felt scared. Because for the first time, I realized that my mother and Scott weren't just ambitious. They were dangerous. And I couldn't shake one question from my mind. If Grandma already had the FBI watching them, what would my mother do when she found out I was now in control? The storm outside began to rattle the window panes. I stared at the Aurora logo embossed on the leather folder, traced its edges with my finger, and whispered to myself, "I'll protect it, whatever it takes." I didn't know that promise would soon test every part of who I was. When I finally called my father, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. 4 years of silence doesn't vanish with one conversation. He answered on the second ring. "Ilara?" His voice cracked slightly, the way it always did when he was nervous, but trying not to show it. "Hi." "Dad?" There was a pause, long enough to feel like a lifetime. Then, "You sound older." "I am," I said softly. "A lot has happened." We agreed to meet that weekend at a small cafe in downtown Boston, one that used to be his favorite. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. His once dark hair was streaked with gray, and there were new lines around his eyes. But his smile, tired, hesitant, genuine, hadn't changed. He stood up as I approached, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Neither of us knew how to begin. "I heard you graduated," he said finally. "Almost," I smiled. "Final semester." He nodded, proud but careful, like he didn't want to overstep. Then quietly, "Your mother never told me how you were doing." I took a deep breath. That's what I wanted to talk about. I told him everything about Grandma's suspicions, the forged documents, the trust fund, the FBI investigation. The words came out in waves. I didn't cry. I just needed him to know. He listened without interrupting, his hands clasped around his coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. When I finished, the silence between us was heavy. Not empty, but full of everything that had never been said. Finally, he exhaled. "Elara, there's something you need to know about why I left." My chest tightened. "Dad, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." He looked out the window, eyes distant. "Your mother and I were falling apart long before that night. She hated the business, and not because it was hard, but because it was mine in the company's eyes. Everyone trusted me, not her. I tried to include her, but she only saw it as competition." He paused, rubbing his forehead. "When Scott appeared, I thought he was just another consultant. Then the bank started flagging irregular transfers. Small, hidden ones. When I confronted her, she accused me of trying to sabotage her. And then, the affair." I froze. "You knew about them?" He nodded slowly. "Not at first. But I found messages, trips to New York, private meetings. She said they were business. I wanted to believe that." His jaw tightened. "Until the day I was accused of financial misconduct. I was framed, Elara. They used company accounts, redirected funds, then made it look like I'd approved them. When I tried to defend myself, she turned the board against me." My heart pounded. "Why didn't you fight it? Why didn't you tell Grandma?" He gave a small, bitter laugh. "Because your mother threatened to expose the affair, to make it public, drag everyone down with her. She said she'd use you and Mila as leverage, said she'd ruin me completely." He swallowed hard. "So I left. I thought walking away would protect you." The words hit me like a punch. All those years I thought he abandoned us, and all along he was saving us from her. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The world outside kept moving, people laughing, the smell of coffee and rain, but for me, everything had stopped. When I finally spoke, my voice was barely a whisper. "She said you were unstable, that you stole from the company." He looked at me, and the pain in his eyes was worse than anger. "I know." "That's what she needed you to believe." He reached into his coat pocket and slid a small flash drive across the table. "I kept the records," he said. "Bank statements, board emails, the original project approvals. I couldn't go to the authorities back then. I didn't want to put you through the scandal. But if you're really going to fix what they broke, you'll need this." I picked it up carefully, as if it were fragile. In a way it was. It held the truth. I nodded. "I'll make it right, Dad. I promise." He smiled faintly. "You sound like your grandmother." That night I drove back to Vermont under heavy rain. The flash drive sat on the seat beside me, and for the first time in years, I felt the shape of a plan forming. Not revenge, but something sharper. When I got home, Grandma was awake, waiting in her study. "You talked to him," she said. "It wasn't a question." I nodded. "He gave me this." She took the drive, plugged it into her computer. Within minutes, spreadsheets and transfer logs appeared. Her eyes widened slightly. "He kept everything." "Every single transaction," I said. She smiled, a small, fierce smile I'd never seen before. "Your father was smarter than they thought." Then she turned to me. "We have enough to expose them, but if we go public, they'll fight back. Hard." I hesitated. "Then what do we do?" She looked at me steadily. "We don't fight back. We outsmart them." The next day, Detective Valerie Brooks arrived, tall, sharp, with eyes that missed nothing. She placed a thick folder on the table. "You were right," she said to Grandma. "Scott's record is longer than we thought. He was charged with securities fraud in Florida in 2017. Different name, different face. Same pattern, charming wealthy women, convincing them to invest, then disappearing with the money." I swallowed hard. "So he's not just a liar, he's a predator." Valerie nodded. "And your mother? She's not just complicit, she's a co-signer on at least 2 offshore accounts." Grandma leaned back in her chair, expression unreadable. "So the daughter of Aurora's founder is now funding a con artist. The irony's almost poetic. Then she looked at me. Ilara, we're going to set a trap. I blinked. A trap? She nodded. They think they've already won. We'll use that arrogance. Valerie opened another folder, revealing a draft contract. This is a fake investment agreement for the European expansion. Once Brenda signs this, she'll be legally admitting to fraudulent transfers. We'll record everything. My heart raced. What if she doesn't sign? Grandma's eyes hardened. She will. Scott will make sure of it. Over the next week, the house transformed into a war room. Documents were printed, calls were made, cameras were hidden. Lucas Chen, our lawyer, joined the team. Calm, precise, unflappable. We weren't just preparing a lawsuit. We were preparing justice. One night, as we reviewed the plan, Grandma turned to me. You know, Ilara, revenge isn't always fire and fury, she said. Sometimes it's paperwork. I laughed softly, though there was nothing funny about any of it. But deep inside, I felt something awaken, a strength I didn't know I had. For years, I'd carried the pain of being abandoned, of being unseen. Now I had purpose. Not to destroy, but to rebuild what they tried to steal. As I walked to my room that night, the house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not fear, not grief, anticipation. Because this time, we weren't the ones being blindsided. We were the storm they never saw coming. It began like every lie does, with a smile, a rehearsed, dazzling, hollow smile. It had been 3 weeks since we finalized the plan. Grandma, Valerie, Lucas, and I had built a trap so precise it could only work once. Every document, every signature, every camera angle, timed to the second. Now all we needed was the bait to walk through the door, and that bait was my mother. The snow was falling heavily that morning when the front gates opened. I was standing by the living room window when I saw the black SUV pull up. The moment I saw them step out, Brenda and Scott, dressed in matching gray coats, my stomach tightened. She still looked like the woman I remembered, elegant, flawless, untouchable, but there was something different in her eyes, desperation disguised as charm. Scott was all slick confidence, carrying a leather briefcase and a grin that could sell poisonous perfume. The doorbell rang. For a brief moment I just stood there, watching the handle turn. Then I heard her voice again, smooth and performative. Ilara, sweetheart. She pulled me into a hug before I could react. Oh, darling, look at you. You've grown into such a beautiful woman. I've missed you so much. Her perfume filled my lungs, sweet and suffocating. I stepped back. Hi, Mom. Scott extended his hand. Ilara, it's been a long time. You've been busy. I hear. Busy saving what's left, I said evenly. He chuckled. Ah, business talk. I like that. We sat in the living room, the fire crackling between us. Grandma wasn't there. Not yet. She wanted this scene to play out first. Brenda clasped her hands together, smiling wide. I was so surprised when I heard that Mother put you in charge, honey. That's a huge responsibility for someone your age. I'm just worried you might be overwhelmed. I kept my tone calm. I'm fine. Well, Scott and I have been thinking. It might make sense for us to come back and manage Aurora together, just like it used to be. A family business. I almost laughed. Family business. She didn't notice the cameras or the small red recording light hidden behind the antique vase. Scott leaned forward. We even drew up a proposal, a new European branch under our joint leadership. You and your grandmother would retain ownership, of course. We'd just handle the expansion logistics. I looked at the document he slid across the table. It was a contract, the one Valerie and Lucas had prepared. All she needed to do was sign it. I skimmed it slowly, pretending to hesitate. Then I said, I'll need Mom to co-sign. It's a family project, right? Scott nodded immediately. Of course. He turned to Brenda. Honey? She hesitated just long enough for guilt to flicker in her eyes. Then she smiled again, the same plastic smile she'd worn my whole life. Of course, darling. She picked up the pen and signed. The click of the pen cap closing felt like thunder. Every recording device in the room had caught it, her signature. Her acknowledgement, her voice. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the tension drain from my shoulders. Thank you, Mom, I said softly. You've just made this so much easier. Her smile faltered. What do you mean? I stood up. You just signed a legal acknowledgement admitting to your role in the unauthorized expansion. The fake accounts, the forged power of attorney, all of it. Her face went pale. What are you talking about? Grandma's voice came from behind her. She's talking about justice. My mother spun around. There stood Grandma Maggie, strong, composed, and colder than I'd ever seen her. Behind her, Lucas and Valerie entered, both holding folders. Brenda's voice trembled. Mother, you can't. I can, Grandma said firmly. And I will. Scott's confidence cracked. He stood up quickly. This is ridiculous. You can't entrap us like this. Valerie stepped forward, flipping open her badge. Actually, we can. The FBI's been monitoring your accounts for 6 months. You've been wiring stolen corporate funds to offshore shell companies registered under false names, including your own. Scott froze. You can't prove... She dropped a printed record on the coffee table. $7.5 million says otherwise. He went pale. Brenda, we need to go. But Brenda was staring at me, not them, her face a storm of rage and disbelief. You set me up, she hissed. You little traitor. No, I said quietly. I saved what you tried to destroy. She lunged forward, eyes wild. You think you're better than me? Everything you have is because of me. Grandma stepped between us. Enough, Brenda. You don't get to claim what you abandon. There was a knock at the door. 2 federal agents entered, calm, efficient, no drama. Scott Hawthorne, you're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and financial conspiracy. Brenda Hawthorne, you are under investigation for aiding and abetting. Brenda turned on Scott. You said this was safe. You said... He didn't even look at her. He just muttered, I should have known your family was smarter than you. Then the agents cuffed him. Brenda screamed, You can't do this. I'm your daughter, Mother. Grandma didn't flinch. You stopped being my daughter the day you sold your soul for a bigger office? The agents guided Brenda toward the door. For a moment, she looked back at me, her face twisted, not with guilt, but with pure humiliation. Her voice cracked. You'll regret this. Alara. I shook my head. I already did, for years. And then she was gone. When the door finally closed, the house went quiet again. But this silence was different, not the suffocating kind that followed my father's departure. This one felt clean, like the sound that comes after a storm breaks. Grandma exhaled deeply, leaning on her cane. It's over, she said. Valerie smiled faintly. Almost. They'll be charged formally within the week. I turned to Grandma. Do you hate her? She looked at the fire, her expression unreadable. I pity her, she said. She mistook ambition for worth, and she'll spend the rest of her life trying to buy back what she threw away. I sat beside her, the weight of everything crashing down at once. For years I had carried the guilt of being unwanted, the ache of being the daughter left behind. Now, all I felt was exhaustion and relief. Grandma reached over, squeezing my hand. You did well, Alara. Your father would be proud. I smiled weakly. He's part of why I did it. She nodded. Then it settled. We rebuild, on truth this time. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the living room. The fire had died down to embers. Outside, snow kept falling, slow, steady, endless. I looked at the signature on the contract still lying on the table. My mother's handwriting, elegant, confident, careless. The same hand that once wrote me birthday cards and tucked notes into my lunchbox. It didn't make me angry anymore. It just made me sad, because in the end, she had destroyed herself, and all I had done was hold up the mirror. I whispered to the empty room, You once told me to stand with the winners, Mom. I did. You just weren't one of them. And with that, I closed the folder, turned off the light, and finally, for the first time in nearly a decade, went to bed without fear of what tomorrow might bring. 6 months after that night, everything had changed. Not overnight. Real justice never happens overnight, but piece by piece, like rebuilding something sacred from ashes. The courts moved fast. The evidence was undeniable. Scott Hawthorne, or Ethan Price, Gavin Shaw, Leo Hartman, depending on which alias you preferred, was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud, wire theft, and identity manipulation. He didn't even try to appeal.
When the verdict was read, he just looked at Brenda, shook his head, and muttered, "You were supposed to be smarter than this." Brenda burst into tears, the kind that come from shock, not regret.
She was charged as an accomplice. The court recognized her as a participant in fraudulent activity, but Grandma Maggie intervened. She asked the judge for leniency, not because Brenda deserved it, but because Maggie refused to let vengeance write the ending of our story. The judge agreed. Brenda avoided prison, but not consequence. She lost everything: her job, her shares, her reputation. The woman who once lived for luxury was now required to pay restitution, attend mandatory therapy, and complete 2 years of community service. For her, that was the real sentence: obscurity. The day the judgment was finalized, Dad, Michael Quinn, returned to the Aurora headquarters for the first time in nearly a decade. He looked nervous walking through those glass doors, like a man stepping into a ghost story. But when he entered the boardroom and saw Grandma sitting at the head of the table, smiling with quiet pride, I saw his shoulders drop in relief. "Welcome home," she said simply. That was the moment I realized the storm was truly over. Dad took over as interim CEO, while I officially stepped into my new role as creative director of Aurora Hotels Group. It still felt surreal, being back in the same offices where my parents once fought, where every wall had heard both ambition and betrayal. But I wasn't here to repeat their mistakes. I was here to rebuild. Our first major project was something Grandma had dreamed about for years: a sustainable luxury property built entirely from renewable materials. The Phoenix Hotel, a symbol of rebirth. When I showed her the final blueprints, she ran her fingers along the lines and smiled. "Fitting name," she said. "We've all burned enough to earn it." Meanwhile, my little sister Mila moved back to Vermont to live with Dad. She was 13 now, old enough to understand pieces of what had happened, too young to fully grasp the ugliness of it all. Dad shielded her from most of it, and maybe for once, that was the right choice. One night, as I tucked her into bed at Grandma's house, she asked quietly, "Do you think Mom's still mad at us?" I hesitated. "I think she's mad at herself, Mila. She just doesn't know it yet." Mila frowned. "Will she ever come back?" I brushed her hair gently. "Maybe, but that's not for us to wait for anymore." She nodded, sleepy but thoughtful. "I like it better now. Everyone's calmer." I smiled. "Me too, kiddo." Grandma Maggie eventually retired from the day-to-day operations of Aurora, though she remained chairwoman. She spent her mornings gardening and her evenings on the porch, always with a cup of tea and a stack of business reports she pretended not to read. Sometimes I'd join her, and we'd sit in comfortable silence watching the sunset reflect off the lake. One evening she said quietly, "You know, Alara, revenge stories never really end with blood. They end with clarity." I looked at her, confused. "Clarity?" She nodded. "The moment you can look at the people who wronged you and feel nothing, no hate, no anger, just understanding, that's when you've won." I thought about it for a while. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, the day they'd pay for what they did. But now that it had come, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. That's when I understood what she meant. A few months later, I got a call from Valerie Brooks. The FBI had closed the case. All stolen assets recovered, all accounts frozen. She laughed softly over the phone. "You know, Alara, I've seen dozens of corporate fraud cases, but I've never seen a family fight back like this. With brains, not bullets." I smiled. "We don't do bullets. We do blueprints." She chuckled. "Remind me never to underestimate a Quinn woman." When we hung up, I sat in my office overlooking the Vermont mountains, the same peaks my grandmother saw when she founded Aurora 50 years ago. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's legacy. I was building my own. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor. Brenda. She looked smaller. Not physically. She was still composed, still stylish in her understated way. But something in her was gone. The arrogance, the edge. It had burned out. She stood in the doorway of my office holding a letter. "I came to apologize," she said quietly. I didn't say anything. She handed me the letter, trembling slightly, and added, "I've been seeing a therapist. I know I can't fix what I did, but I wanted you to know I'm trying." For a moment, the little girl in me,
The one who used to beg for her attention, wanted to hug her, but the woman I'd become knew better. I hope you do try, I said gently, for your own sake. She nodded, tears glistening but not falling. You sound like your grandmother. Good, I replied. She saved this family. She turned to leave, but before walking out she looked back once more. I did love you, you know, she said, even when I was terrible at it. I didn't answer.
I just watched her walk away, slow, unsure, human, and that was enough. That evening we had our usual Sunday dinner, me, Dad, Grandma, and Mila. No arguments, no tension, just the smell of roast chicken, laughter, and the clinking of silverware. After dinner, I unrolled the latest blueprint for the Phoenix Hotel on the dining table. Solar-powered rooms, locally sourced materials, and a design that blends nature with architecture, I explained, my voice shaking slightly with pride. Dad studied it closely, tracing the outline of the lobby. This is the future, Ilara, he said, his eyes shining. I smiled. It's ours. We all sat there for a moment, 4 survivors of the same storm, realizing that we'd finally stepped into the calm. Later that night, as I stood by the window, I thought about everything that had happened. About the lies, the loss, the years of silence, and I thought about what Grandma said, clarity. I finally understood. Revenge wasn't about destroying someone else's life. It was about reclaiming your own. I looked out at the dark horizon, where the outline of the new hotel site glimmered faintly under the moonlight. The sound of construction in the distance felt like music, the rhythm of renewal. And in that quiet, I whispered to myself, not as a daughter or a victim, but as the woman who survived it all. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who stands beside you when everything else falls apart. And justice isn't given. It's built, brick by brick, truth by truth. The wind rustled through the trees outside, carrying the faint echo of my grandmother's laughter, and for the first time in years, I let myself smile, not because the pain was gone, but because I had finally learned how to live beyond it,